Hello everyone. So today we're going to be learning how to start making our characters. We are going to be working with a BaseMesh to start with, so you guys can get started working on your characters without having to build the basic form of a humanoid character from scratch. Using BaseMeshes is something that all industry professionals do. Most people will build a very basic base mesh that they can use to kind of get them started and get them down a path quickly so they can conceptualize their character a lot faster, and they're not spending time creating arms and legs and fingers and toes just in order to get a form to start sculpting with. So what we're going to go over today is a few different things. Whenever I start making a character, I am always wondering, where do I start? So like I said before, starting with a base mesh is a great place to start because it can kind of get the juices flowing and get you working faster and be more in the art state of mind and not spending so much time with technical stuff while we're still trying to flesh out what our character is going to look like. So this workflow that I'm going to show you today is how I start my characters and how a lot of industry professionals start their characters. Some of the terminology that we're going to go over today is silhouette. The silhouette of our character is very important. The form of our character, we're going to talk about primary, secondary, and tertiary forms. And then the gesture of our character, what we're trying to convey as a theme for our character. Some of the tools we're going to use, we're going to be doing a lot of masking. And some of the selection methods for masking that we're going to go over, lasso selection, marquee selection, transpose selection. And then we're also going to go over the transpose lines or action lines and how we can use those to move, scale, and rotate our character and all of the different parts of our character to get started. So if we jump into Zbrush here, we can head to Canvas and we can open up that BaseMesh file. You can see I downloaded it here already, BaseMesh ZTL file. And you'll want to download that so then you can bring it here into Zbrush. Before I do anything, I like to get out of that red wax material, and I will drag my Boxman out here on the canvas so I can take a look at him. And if we look at him in polyframe mode, you can see he's very nice, basic, blocky character. Could really be anything. He's nice and generic, so he doesn't lead us down any path when we're trying to come up with what our character is going to look like, or we're following from our own personal concept that we've made. He's only about 920 polygons, which is a great low-res mesh to start with. So I'll pop him out of polyframe mode, and right away I will put him into perspective, so I'll click perspective on. We see life in perspective, so whenever we're sculpting a full character like this, it's good to keep your character in perspective so we can see it in what it would look like in real life. Then next I'm going to hit X on the keyboard. So X, that's going to turn on symmetry for me, which you can see here. If you forget the hotkey for that, you can come up to Transform here, and down inside the Transform palette you will see Activate Symmetry X right here. So we want to do that before we do anything so we can work with both sides of the body. You're going to be working in symmetry for the majority of your character creation throughout this class, pretty much until the end or until you start putting some clothes on your character where you'll be posing or adding asymmetrical detail. But for the most part, we're going to stay within symmetry because it helps us speed up the process. So you may notice that my interface is a little bit different. It's not something that we're going to cover in this class, but if you're ever wondering and you have your own version of ZBrush, you can go into Preferences and you can change your configure settings to have different colors, and you can drag and drop your favorite brushes here on the interface and some of your favorite tools here. So don't be confused by if you see some of my buttons are a little bit different. You're not going to need your setup to look like mine at all. I'm going to work with just the very basic tools. And all of these tools that you see can be found inside the ZBrush interface somewhere. I've just dragged my favorite ones out here so I can get to them quicker. So to start, if my character here is sitting in my scene and I've got him in perspective, turn the floor on, you can kind of see about how big he is in scale. I want to start thinking about my character. Now for my character concept, I was going to do a giant, humanoid giant type character. So I'm going to work with this really, really low poly mesh and try to manipulate this to get the pose and the gesture down for my giant before I start doing any dynameshing or any sculpting or anything like that. We can get our character really far along without actually subdividing or sculpting any detail, just by using masking and our transpose lines. So what I like to do, my workflow here, is I like to use my masking tool, so I'll hold down the Control key, and if you see this changes up here in the top left corner, you can click on that, and it brings up my masking brushes. I'm still holding Control. If I let go of Control, you'll see my brush changes back, and I'll get my entire brush palette. So I'll want to hold Control, click on that, and then I will get my different masking selection tools. I typically like the lasso mask selection. By default, we have the marquee selection, which comes out as just a basic square, which you can definitely use, but the lasso helps us get a little bit more control. So I'll hold the Control key down again, and I'll click lasso. And then I will come in here, and I'm going to mask out, you can see, just his arms. And then I want to invert that mask because I'm going to adjust the size of his arms a little bit. So I'm going to hold down Control key again and just tap in an empty area. And that's going to invert my mask. So now everything that's black will not be affected. Only his arms will be affected. So now I'm going to come up to these tools here. These are really, really powerful tools. These three buttons here. These are your transpose line tools, or your action lines. ZBrush likes to call the line that you draw out an action line, but these tools are called your transpose tools. So I'm going to click on the R because I want to do a rotate, and you can see it defaults this line here, but I want to drag my action line out in relation to what I'm trying to alter. So this arm, I'm going to think about that shoulder joint's right about here, and I'm going to click, and then I'm going to start dragging this out. And if I drag that line off of my model, it'll stay nice and straight. If I were to drag this line a second time and allow it to stay on my model and we turned, you can see it's going to follow the contour of my mesh. So I just want to be conscious of that while I'm making adjustments with my transpose lines. Depending on what I want to do, I may want to or may not want to follow the contour of my body depending on how I want to pivot that action line. So for this, I'm just going to draw off the model a little bit, and whenever we draw out our action line, these three circles here all do different things. If we grab this outer circle, this also does something different. So you can see as I float my cursor over my action line, the outer ring of these highlight. And then when I go towards the center, these inner rings show up. If I go to my outer ring, I can grab the middle one and move the entire line itself to readjust it. If I tap on the one that I started from, I'll alter my pivot point. So I will swap. So now this one on my right here is now my pivot point instead of this one. I can tap this one to change again. And if I grab that one, I will pivot on the outside, and you'll see it'll swap my pivot point again for me. Now if I go to this one on the far end, that's away from my pivot, I can change the direction of my line. And this line can be changed and snapped if I'm holding shift. You'll see it'll snap to about every, I think it's every 15 to 45 degrees. Or I can let go of shift and it will be more free-flowing. Just all depends. There's a lot of different scenarios when you get into making things that you'll want more control over this line as you're playing with it. But for now, we're just going to drag it straight out off the body. Now, move, scale, and rotate all do different things. Since I'm in rotate, if I grab this center circle, I'll start to rotate on that axis. If I grab the outer circle, I'll start to rotate on this axis. And then if I grab the inner one, I'll start to rotate on the other axis. So you'll just want to play with each of these circles to kind of get what you're looking for. So for me, I'm going to work on a giant, so his arms need to be extra long and extra big, so we're going to work on those first. So I'm going to pull these down a little bit, and then I'm going to redraw out my line. I'm going to come to scale. Now scale also does the same thing. Each one of these circles scales in a different direction. If I go that way, I'll scale like this. If I go this way, I'll scale this way. And then if I go down the end here, I'll scale like this. So it's all just a matter of playing with your mesh and playing with your action lines to get the desired effect that you're looking for. Now move's just a little bit different. If we're on move and we grab the center, we'll move the entire piece around. If we grab this one acts very differently. If I grab that one, it's actually going to smash the mesh down all the way to that point. That's a really cool tool when we get into hard surface, but for this we tend to stay away from that whenever we're doing organic. If I grab the far one, this will actually stretch and push and pull your model. So if you're trying to lengthen something, you'd want to go to move and pull out at the end to do that. So I'm actually going to do that. I'm going to lengthen these arms a little bit. Go back to rotate, turn them a little, and then I'm going to go back to scale these up. Then I'm going to readjust my mask. I'm going to draw further down my arm, and then I'm going to redraw out my action line. Nope. Let's undo that. Sometimes it's better to just move the action line out of the way completely and then redraw it again if it's not really cooperating. So I'm trying to give him some big giant arms. When you're scaling, don't be worried if this happens. All you want to do is switch to move, and then you're going to just move it back into place like that. Okay. Now let's work on these legs. I'm going to come up here and mask lasso these out. Hold control and tap in an empty area to invert again. And I'm going to draw my action line out. Stretch this guy out a little. And we're not too worried about our topology right now because eventually this guy's going to become a Dynamesh. But it's good to work in low polys right now because it allows me to get the base of my character down before I go in and start Dynameshing and worrying about where muscles are and things like that. Right now I can just kind of stretch him out, see how he's looking. Make sure his proportions are doing okay. I'm going to scale his head up here, so I'm going to mask off his head, draw out my scale here. Okay, not too bad. While we're doing this, we can hold control and drag in an empty area to clear our mask. Then we can hit B on the keyboard and bring up our brush menu. Mine's going to look a lot different than yours because I have a lot of custom brushes that I've made or that I've downloaded from the internet. but all we're going to use is the move brush. And I'm just going to come in and kind of tweak some of these spots. It's going to kind of have a little bit of a gut, so I'm going to pull that out a little bit. Alright. So right now we're just worried about silhouette and overall primary forms. So when I talk about silhouette of a character, that's very, very important in the game industry because you're going to be building a low poly model like this to later project all your high resolution details onto. So your silhouette that you capture with your low poly cage that you're making here is going to be very important because that's what's going to hold, is going to be the structure for all your high resolution detail. So I don't want to get too finicky with it. We're just looking for the overall silhouette. So I think his legs are looking a little too skinny. So see, I dragged out a mask and then I'm actually grabbing that center circle and I'm pulling down so I can kind of thicken his legs a little. And then if you notice these little green and red icons that appear on the side of the transpose line, if I click on that, it'll change the direction of my line for me, so then I can hold shift and I can move his legs in a little. I can rotate them a little bit. And they got a little too bulky here, so thin those out a little bit. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to mask this off. Actually, this will be a good way to show the last way that we can do masking. When we have our transpose line selected, if we're hovering over our body, and you have one of these tools selected here, and you hold down Control and you start to drag on your mesh, you'll actually start to pull a mask along the surface of the body. So sometimes this actually can be a little helpful if you're trying to fine-tune an area and your lasso isn't quite doing the job for you. So now I can grab this arm down here and I can kind of turn that in. Kind of pull his arms down a little bit. Then I'm going to go back to draw so I can grab my move brush and I'm going to pull these out. Just because he's going to kind of have a little bit of a gut. Going to be a fat giant. Okay. Okay. I'm not being too picky with it. I just want to kind of nail the silhouette down of the character. And I'm going to show you what I mean when I say silhouette in a second. So, if we look at this, from here we can kind of see all the blocky detail and everything, and we can see what's working and what's not working. But if we were to come over here to our material palette and click on flat color, and I like to choose just a little bit darker color, you can see I take away all of that detail, so now I can just look at the silhouette of my character. So this is what all your high resolution detail is going to be wrapped on top of when you make a game character. You're going to make your low poly mesh like this, and if you've ever played a game and seen your character looks a little blocky or triangulated, but then there's a lot of texture and different things applied to that, that's because they have a base mesh where they're trying to get the overall silhouette of the character, and then they're covering it in all of their baked maps, their diffuse maps and normal maps and things like that. But this is what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to make sure that our silhouette is sticking with our theme of our character. So what I like to do is I will bring him over here a little bit, and I'll turn perspective mode off. And then I like to hold Shift and click the S key, and that takes a snapshot. So then I can hold Shift S again and take another snapshot. So that drops those two images to the canvas. So now I can come back here, go back to my basic material, and I can look at my silhouette and see what's working and what isn't. So I think I'm having a little trouble here with his back. Need to kind of widen that up a little bit. And his butt might be sticking out a little far. But he also needs some leg muscles. I don't want to make him too buff because my character is kind of a skinny-legged giant. Okay. Okay, we're not worried about muscles or anything like that yet. We're just trying to get the basic form. Like I said before when I was talking about form, you saw that it said primary, secondary, and tertiary forms. That's art terminology for primary form is what we're trying to achieve here. We're trying to work on just the silhouette of our character. Secondary forms would be pec muscles and biceps and major muscle groups and bony landmarks, you know, the basic foundation of his face. Those are your secondary forms. So those are what we're going to put in once we start sculpting on this guy. But we want to lock in his primary form first, and before we send him into Dynamesh and get him all set and ready to start being sculpted on. And that's when we'll start worrying about all of our secondary form, and that's not going to be until next week when we start going over some anatomy basics so we can really get our characters moving along. But for here, he's just going to stay very, very blocky, and I'm only concerned with how he looks from about this distance. Does he capture that ogreish giant feel that I'm trying to go for? And he can always be tweaked later on. He can always be altered. So don't feel like you're locked into your model once you go to Dynamesh. The beauty of Dynamesh is that we can change it all through the process. So here I'm going to use that transpose masking technique here. If I hold down the control key, I'm going to draw down the mesh until I get to his legs. And I'm going to invert that because I want to rotate his upper body. And I'm going to draw a line out just about from where his hip is. Go back to rotate and kind of turn him forward a little. Alright, so this is all that's going to be due for this week. I want you to, after you finish your model, so if I am all done here, I'll hit Control N, that'll clear my canvas. And I'm going to go back to my flat color, and I'm going to pick something a little dark. You can do black if you want. You don't have to, but something just a little darker. Come out of perspective mode. And on my canvas, I'm going to do Shift S, turn him to the profile, and do Shift S again. And then I'm going to come back to my basic material, bring him back to color, turn my perspective back on, and then I like to do a nice 3/4 view. So this is about 3/4 view. Alright, and then that's it. I will take a snapshot of this. I'll go to Document, and I will export an image, and I will export out a JPEG. This is what I want you to submit for this week. I want you to flesh out just the basics using the BaseMesh of your character. I don't want you to subdivide any further than this. I still want to see it at 900 polygons. I don't want to see you sending it to Dynamesh or doing anything too crazy. I really want you to explore your masking tools, and these transpose lines up here are very powerful, and that will get you well on your way to creating the overall feel of your character. And make sure that your character is standing. We're not going to work on any characters that are sitting at first. Later on we can pose our characters, but I really want you to consider making your concepts, if you have them crouching or sitting, to change them to a standing position, because anytime you would ever submit a character for a game, they would never be already in a posed position. They would usually be in an A pose, which this is, or a T pose with the arms out to the side. They would never be sitting or crouched or laying down or anything like that. So try to leave them standing in the A pose like this, or a T pose with their arms outstretched. But download this BaseMesh from Canvas and get started and have a good time. Hopefully you guys start to see some of these basic tools and how the power of ZBrush really can get us going on making characters. And good luck!